Welcome to Sunday Recap. I'm Nana and you are here with a very special guest, Carole. Hello Carole, welcome to Sunday Recap. Now we had all age service on Sunday and Carole, you brought us the message. We are still on our series, His Story, Our Story. And you know, as our guest Carole, we always give a 3-minute challenge. Are you up for the challenge?
I am.
Okay, she is. So that's good. So in 3 minutes, Carole, can you give us a summary of what your message on Sunday was about?
Mm-hmm. So the overarching theme was God is our liberator, the chain breaker. And so the reading we had was where Peter has been imprisoned simply for preaching the gospel. He's in there and the believers are out there praying for him every day, every night. And the interesting thing about the timing of this is it's the time of the Passover, when the Israelites remember how God brought them out of slavery in Egypt to freedom. And so all this must have been in the back of their minds when the believers were praying. And they kept on praying, And Peter, sleeping peacefully in the prison, even though he was chained up, gets woken up bizarrely by an angel who leads him out of the prison. The doors fly open, he's out in the street, he goes to where he knows that people are praying and tells them that God has released him. And at first they just don't believe it's actually possible. And so, you know, I asked some questions about what do we do when we're stuck? Do we trust that God can do something about it and rest as Peter did? And I asked a question about the believers. Do you support your friends when they're stuck? Do you know what's happening with your friends, and do you pray for them faithfully? And then I asked, do you, when you hear good news that your prayer has been answered, do you actually believe it, or do you just pass it off as a coincidence or think, oh no, it can't be possible? So that's it in a nutshell, that God is our liberator, and you know, do we behave as if God can liberate us, and do we actually, you know, go with that?
We're going to essentially go through that passage with Peter, you know, in prison, and then a body of believers elsewhere having a different experience of trusting God. And so, you know, Peter in prison. Talk to us about Peter in prison.
Oh, what can I say about Peter in prison? Yeah. Now, I don't know what was going through his mind. We don't have much idea because we're not told. But all I know is he was there for days and days and days. And, you know, Herod is probably planning to put him to death. That's what he's already done with the Apostle James. He put him to the sword. And so Peter is waiting to find out what's going to happen to him. And the night that the angel comes, it's actually the night before his fate is going to be decided. He's going to be brought out in front of the people, and he's going to decide. It's going to be decided whether he's going to live or die. And amazingly, Peter is not sitting up all night worrying. He's not weeping and wailing. He's sleeping peacefully, even though, like I say, he's chained by 2 chains. It can't have been comfortable for him. Yeah. And there he is, seemingly trusting in God.
Yeah. One of the questions that you asked was, when we're stuck, can we wait patiently for God to help us? And do you think that maybe that's what Peter was doing in prison, or maybe he was just expecting, if I die, I die?
Very hard to tell. Yeah, you know, we're not told what's going through his mind. There may have been an element of, you know, I trust God, and even if I die, because of course, you know, James did die, Jesus died before him, and you know, that all came right, because that was all part of God's plan. So whatever it was that was going through Peter's mind, he was trusting that good would come out of it, because God is in control of all of it.
Yeah. Whilst he was in prison, we had a body of believers who were praying for Peter, and it's funny because they were praying for Peter, believing I suppose in their prayers, believing God for Peter's deliverance and his release, but somehow they weren't expectant. And so sometimes, so that was a kind of just a funny contrast in that they were praying for Peter, but not really expecting their prayers to be answered. And of course, Rhoda came into the story, didn't she? So
yeah, that bit wasn't in the original reading I was given, but I just had to keep it in because it's such a funny story.
It is.
That, Peter arrives at the door and he's knock, 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 knock. Rhoda's like, who is it? He says, it's me, it's Peter. She recognises his voice and doesn't let him in. She runs back in to see the other believers and says, look, it's Peter at the door. Of course, it's the middle of the night. And they're probably thinking that, the authorities are after them as well.
Yeah.
So, they just can't handle it.
Yeah.
So Peter's left out there knocking, knocking, knocking.
And Rhoda's going back and forth,
yeah.
saying, it's him.
It really is him.
And, one of the questions that you asked off of the back of that was, are we expecting God to answer our prayers? Do we believe it? And I suppose, how can we, in our prayers, in our expectations, when we're waiting of God, really believe and not just pray just because it's the right thing to do or it's the expected thing to do.
I think there's something there about knowing that God does really love us. And if we really believe that, then we know that everything is in God's hands, we're in God's hands, our friends are in God's hands. And it's important not to beat ourselves up over having enough faith to believe that God will do what we would like him to do. It's not the size of our faith that matters, it's the size of our God and his goodness and his faithfulness. So I don't think there's any great thing we need to be doing. We just need to be asking and just to be open really to whatever happens. And if we don't believe it, well, okay, God knows what we're like. Yes. He's not expecting us to be, super spiritual about stuff. And, sometimes we're not ready for God's answer, but he does it anyway.
He does it anyway. I can imagine that when Peter walked through the door, some of them may have realised that, I was praying, but I actually didn't expect God to answer the prayer. And then I'm sure there were some who were like, oh, thank God. And I find it interesting that there's a little girl in the story, and we know what Jesus says about, he says, come into the kingdom like a little child, and that childlike faith, not childish faith, but childlike faith, in that, children, they believe anything, they believe anything that you tell them, and they will expect, if you tell them, look, I'll take you to Toys R Us, they will be expecting, that Saturday morning, Mum, Dad, you said that we're going to Toys R Us today. So, there's an expectancy, and I think, just the fact that there's a child in that story also kind of brings, this, the concept of believing and expecting and being patient for God to answer your prayers. I thought that was an interesting character in that passage.
That's a very good point, because that's something I didn't bring out, but you're absolutely right. Childlike faith is expectant and believes.
One last thing, Carole, we talked about or you talked about God being the chain breaker and God being the liberator, and so when it comes to maybe things that we feel bound by or hindered by, how can we approach God, or what do we do to kind of keep in mind that he is these things, because it can be quite difficult especially if you're going through a tough situation. So.
Absolutely. And you know what, we've all been through those times. Even not long ago, last autumn, I was going through a really difficult patch with my mental health. I was anxious all the time. I knew that God was in control and everything, but my brain couldn't get my head around it. And you know, the best thing you can do, I think, is just to keep reminding yourself of God's faithfulness. What He's done for you in the past, what He's done for God's people, what He's done in the Bible, what He's done, you know, the prayers that have been answered. Just keep reminding yourself. And the other thing is, allow yourself to be supported by others. Nobody knows this, but when I was going through all that, Manny was really caring towards me. He said, "You're not right, are you?" And I told him about it. And every single day for about 2-3 months, he would send me a little message of encouragement, and I knew he was praying. So we've got to be supporting each other, because we all go through tough times, and we all get stuck sometimes.
Yeah, we will all get to a particular point in life where you need the support of others, and like you rightly said, keep remembering God's faithfulness, keep recollecting the things that God has done in your life, and encourage yourself on those things. So Carole, thank you very much for joining us on Sunday Recap. It's been wonderful having you. Thank you for the message on Sunday as well. If you have not listened to Sunday's message, please go back to our YouTube channel, our Instagram page as well, and of course our Facebook, and you can find Sunday's message there as well. And during the week, of course, catch us on Instagram with all that we're doing throughout the week. And it's goodbye from me, and
goodbye from me.
Goodbye from Carole as well. Have a great week. If you have any takeaways, please put them in the comment section below. So until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.